So Mark O'Halloran was the writer and main actor in this.
Yeah.
I just wondered how you and him got together and came up with this idea.
Well, when the idea of Adam and Paul first came about, I was working. I hadn't made shorts, and had been writing, but I had started. Just felt I needed to be directing, which is a thing that directors don't get to do enough, especially at the beginning, and especially then when there wasn't a lot of video equipment and readily accessible equipment that you could just go out and make something with. So I made a big effort and got involved in making TV commercials, which was, a double-edged sword, good and bad, and it's a sort of very tough training, and it's like sort of boot camp, because you have to work in different styles to a brief with a client, with a budget, with a proper crew. So for a young filmmaker, there are lots of good things about it. But I was really desperate to make a film, and I was lucky that through the producer that I made ads with, I met Mark, who was writing, and he had this envelope of ideas, like a brown manila sort of folder of treatments and thoughts, and there was just this one scene he'd written between these two characters, which had a kind of sound to it, or a shape to it, the way the dialogue was written, and a certain kind of, I don't know, it's hard to describe it, I could sort of hear Laurel and Hardy in the way that they spoke to each other. There's a kind of formality to the way that they spoke. It was very sort of gentle and funny, but also quite poignant, and that's what we started talking about. So that's how we met, actually, through the idea, and then we became very close friends and collaborated on bringing it to a kind of, giving it a structure and a shape, and turning it into a film.
Okay. Are they based on people that you met, or did you go out and sort of talk to homeless people to get them ideas?
We did, but we did it the other way around. We started with those two characters kind of, the way Mark describes it. Mark O'Halloran, the writer, was from a small town called Ennis in the west of Ireland, and when he came to Dublin, he hadn't really come across drug addicts before in the way that they exist in a big urban centre. And he said he became fascinated by sort of ghost-like characters, often in pairs, who just kind of wander around the city in a sort of different time zone to the rest of the like he described it as like a sort of strange dance. He has this great description of seeing two addicts fighting over a single chalk ice, and they're both holding the handle, but it was sort of a really angry fight, but in slow motion, So one guy's, it's my chalk ice, no, it's my chalk ice, until the chalk ice had already sort of melted and fallen on the ground. And so Mark said he just started making notes of things that he saw. So it was all from the outside. And from my point of view as well, it's about sort of the music in the scene, and about, all people are, the sort of fundamentals of a person are accessible to all of us, because we participate in them ourselves. So you can start by doing that. And what happened was the script was really written, and then we took it to lots and lots of groups of recovering addicts, users who are still taking, and we read it. We read it with people. And
they did the reading of it?
Yeah, they'd read it. They'd take parts, and it was something that they were interested in as well. So it was kind of, and sometimes there were drama groups and recovery groups. So it was an interesting thing for them to have as well. But through that, we discovered actually pretty much that people really believed the characters, and things that we had put in the script, like for example, the boy with Down syndrome who's mugged. When we put that in, we thought, what? And very interesting enough, one of the guys said, "Yeah, we would. That would happen. That happened. That was something that he knew. Because when you're desperate, and that's what happens." Wow. And also, interestingly enough, things that came out of it were, I suppose, some of the things that came out of our work, our research work, was just the idea of that the house is incredibly tidy. Of Janine, because when you've had a full-time job, which is what being a junkie is, in the sense of you get up in the morning and you absolutely have this incredible focus on scoring, which is, that's the narrative of your life. When that's taken away and you're clean, this incredible boredom is what people describe, and a flatness. And so there's like obsessive house cleaning, and you sit there in your clean house and think, just hang on and don't be tempted back into that madness. So, but so we did that research afterwards just to check that we weren't being that we weren't really getting it completely wrong, and it was quite reassuring. But it wasn't a research. It was not. I tend not to. I'm not a research type of like. I don't believe that that's. I think the active imagination is the important part, and then, you know, that still has to be at the centre of it.
I was just wondering, was there anything you had to then take out or change about the script, having put it to these people who had actually experienced it?
Funny enough, there was one. We did have one scene where, which is quite funny. Like there was a scene at the beginning just after they wake up, on the mattress, and we had a scene in the script where they're walking along and they just passed these two girls. One of the girls was pushing an old shopping trolley with a microwave in it. That was just written in as a sort of image from the beginning, and they say, "All right, Adam and Paul," and it's the first time you hear their names, and that trope that keeps happening. "All right, Adam and Paul," and one of the lads that we were talking to said, "Nah, they would definitely have robbed that. They'd have robbed that microwave. You know, that's not realistic." But mostly, no, we didn't. I mean, we did. There are lots of things that we got, like the way people walk. There's a thing that happens, I think, and you know, there are very specific physical things that happen if you take a lot of heroin, particularly if it's bad heroin over a long period of time. Apart from the obvious things like teeth and skin, it seems to affect muscle tone. So people walk, they sort of sit back in the walk a bit, and so a lot of what happened was that when it came to the point of actually preparing the shoot, the actors like Tom and Mark, well, Tom, who hadn't been involved in the writing, and Mark, who had, that was really useful for them to try to just refine the physical and the sound of voices, and we did some. It was amazing. There's one group, and they're still going. They're called Recovery Through Art and Drama, and meet every day, and it's like tied to their social welfare, but it's a sort of it's a way of creating a kind of community as well. It was very interesting. They did Tai Chi, and I think watching that group of people, some of whom were really desperate, doing Tai Chi was definitely one of the most. It was both one of the saddest and funniest things I've ever seen. I mean, sad, moving, and also there's lots of real hope in it as well. But just watching a bunch of people in sort of slow motion, in various stages of decay, forming these shapes with this teacher's very small Chinese woman who was running it, and who they communicated all in some strange way all really well. And some of those images became really useful for us because we did incorporate these sort of static sculptural elements into Adam and Paul, you know, where they're just sort of standing, or they've stopped, or somebody falls over slowly. So the dance element of the film is something that was helped by those experiences. It was pretty punishing. We did it in 4 6-day weeks, so 24 days, and I think we went back for 1 day, you know, later on in the edit, just to do pickups, very small things like some of the very observational stuff, like them begging and things that we could do with a hidden crew, you know, just on the street. But yeah, 6-day weeks are not to be recommended because you've really there's no time for people to recover. So I used to make this joke that on the call sheets I would put, like, you know, end of week 1, you know, mild cold, you know, sore feet, end of week 2, blah, you know, it ended up with scurvy, and, you know, to predict what people would be suffering from by the end of it. Funny enough, the only trouble we had actually, and this is something that I've experienced a lot, because things I've done have tended to be, I did 4 TV hours for RTE as well, which were very kind of rooted in a kind of 70s approach to television, where you try to do something interesting of value. You know, it's kind of a mad idea these days that it might actually have some, you know, might actually say something about your culture. But so I've done a lot of shooting in the city centre and in the tougher parts of Dublin, and I have to say we've never had any real hassle in those places. We've only had hassle when we shot in the posher areas of town. You know, really, it's true, because people kind of accept you. You will get some mazzers on the street, and, you know, people who come up and try and get in or into the film, but actually, you know, if you just sort of roll with it, it's okay. We had there's a street in Dublin called Marlborough Street, which is just down by the Abbey, and it's a particularly tough. There's a sort of wet hostel, so there's a lot of alcoholics, and It's really interesting as well, just the thing about shooting, about what happens if you stop in a city to film something, especially if you have a very small crew like we did on Adam and Paul. So you have really no security. You're not separated. It's not like there are crash barriers around. So you really are trying to work with everybody around you. When you stop on the street like that, you do notice everybody else who's stopped, which are people who have nowhere to go, or are begging, or are homeless, or are just curious. And you get into this different part of the city, this different sort of strata of the city. But no, people were generally very good. I mean, when we shot in Ballymun in the flats, there was some of the, generally 16 to, 15 to 18-year-old boys, That's the sort of that's your toughest thing, because they'll be there were guys joyriding and sort of doing handbrake turns as close as they could get to the camera kind of thing. And so there were a few moments like that that weren't ideal. But interestingly enough, I thought maybe people would object to the subject matter. They might say, well, how you're characterizing our community in a particular way. But actually, we just gave people the script and said, this is what we're trying to do. And generally speaking, people responded to the quality of the script and realized that we weren't taking the piss out of anybody, and we weren't, we were trying to humanize characters who are quite often regarded as not really there. I'm fascinated just by how people operate, and you meet people real people are always more interesting than any fictional character, in that they're less predictable. It's if you watch how people behave, and you try to reverse engineer that into a sort of standard character, the script editor would always say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Nobody would say that, or nobody would do that." But people do, and we don't look at them and go, "Hang on, that's that person. That's not a real person." We were used to that. So that I've just made a film which is about I've just made a film about very middle class characters. So I've made a film about privileged teenagers in South Dublin, and that was really interesting for me, because I do feel that quite often, sometimes you get accused at the beginning. For me, I would get accused of, "Oh, what are you doing, you middle class boy, making films about?" Isn't it patronizing? Why are you making films about characters that are not part of your world? But actually, it seems to me that quite often, characters in extremis, like people who are homeless or in difficulty, are given are shown quite sensitively in film. But curiously enough, when you come to middle class people, they're quite often caricatured in cinema. You're sort of, because the dad's got a newspaper and isn't really listening, and the mum's drinking a gin, and the usual sort of cliche of the middle. So we know what problems we're supposed to look at. But so I wanted to show, again, just try to think about people as individuals, and make a film about these particular people and break through those cliches. But there are lots of characters that I'd love to tell stories about.
Once it was released, did you get any homeless shelters get in touch with you about maybe coming and working with them, or how they could use the film, or that sort of thing?
I mean, the film was on the national cinemas for a while, so for junior cert kids saw it, and it was very interesting when it was released, because we did get this. It did have a sort of, it was in Dublin particularly a sort of a film that ran for a long time, and a lot of people went to see it, and in the areas where were a lot of junkies, like Parnell Street and the sort of just the top of O'Connell Street, which is a big area where there were some cinemas there, and they were just full all the time. And in fact, the community of a lot of homeless people went to see Adam Paul in the cinema more than once. And it's anecdotal, but people did say to me that when the film became a kind of phenomenon in Dublin and around the country, that people did seem to, for a while, treat them differently. Whether that's true or not, I'd love to believe it was. That they were more, more aware of them as as people with lives and tragedies and desires, and not just sort of an invisible irritation or something. And but so we did. There was a lot of. I mean, people were really very. That was the thing we were most worried about. Would there be a backlash from the very people themselves? But actually, it was the opposite. And I had a guy when I was filming on the street a while ago. A guy who was really messed up, but when he heard that I was the one who made Adam and Paul, insisted on coming over and getting an autograph, and it was amazing because he didn't have anything else. All he had was his dole card, which I had to sign, and that was like a sort of. But that film meant something to him in a big way, you know, and so that there was that effect, and we did screenings and we did, you know, events, and I mean the thing about being a filmmaker in a funny way is that you do then drift into your next project, and so there is that sort of, you do a light in a world and it does become everything to you for a while, but then you kind of move away from it. But at that time, yeah.
One of the most painful things about being homeless is that you become a nothing.
Yeah.
You no longer exist.
Yeah.
Because people will just walk past you, even if you try and ask them for money or whatever, they will just walk past you as though you weren't there. And so by a lot of what you said tonight about the response to the film is how using the film industry has brought it to light and put it in front of people, and they don't ignore it then because it's a form of entertainment.
And they've also, you know, they hopefully sort of fall in love with those characters, even though they're undoubtedly on occasion despicable. They are also, I mean, that's why we chose that kind of, I always describe the film as a slapstick tragedy, so that we chose that kind of slapstick thing that was sort of Beckettian meets vaudeville thing, because it is accessible, it is entertaining, but it's also, I think it does allow you to empathize in a way that I'm not a big fan of black comedy, you know, where I always say that in black comedy, you know, in the kind of, a lot of the time the audience is sort of asked to collude with the storyteller. Like, we're clever and these characters are stupid. We get the jokes and they don't. But I prefer a kind of more humanistic kind of comedy where it's about all of us recognizing ourselves as being, in a way like them, sort of a bit like kids who don't really know what they're supposed to do. It's just that it's more obvious and more extreme when you're living on the street. But it's interesting what you say about invisibility, because that was one of the reasons why you never know who Adam is and who Paul is. You know, you never find out who's who, because they're just treated as this kind of symbiotic unit. They don't have a kind of individuality. And if somebody, I try and I don't always succeed, but if somebody's begging on the street and you don't want to engage, or you don't have the money, or you're not good, you should at least, if somebody addresses you and asks you something, you should at least say, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. The sort of the 1,000-yard stare and the ignoring is really, it's a really dehumanizing thing.
Part of using film to make that apparent to people, I think, can be a really powerful tool. And I just wondered if it was something you would engage with in the longer term, using film in that way to broach social issues and put things into the light.
I mean, it's a difficult one because primarily, I think, I admire, you know, the Ken Loaches of this world whose entire focus is on that. But it is also a piece of sculpture, and it is also about the beauty of the thing itself. And I tend to approach things with an attitude to trying to get inside and to the truth of that situation, that moment, and those characters. And if you do that, if you succeed in that job, then all those social implications will be there. But if you, for me anyway, if you set out with a kind of thesis or if you're trying to influence an audience to see things a certain way, then I think it has less power. So the films that have affected me most and sort of made me feel most like I'm connecting to other people are films which are just where there's a poetry to them. I'm trying to think of good examples, but pure social issues they interest me politically, and I'm very happy to be involved in talking about those things in other fora, like, you know, in speaking or writing. But in filmmaking, I am drawn to trying to see people as complete, and to try to see the humanity in the characters that I'm making a film about. But my hope is that in doing that, those social questions will also be present. But it's not I don't think it would ever for me be the main focus of what I'm trying to do.
Cheers.